Good morning, everyone. Welcome to the Sunday morning HGP meeting on what is anticipated to be the hottest day of the year in the history of Portland. It's a pleasure to be here with you this morning. My name is Todd Kimball, and some of you know that prior to my 20 years in Portland, I spent 11 years in Phoenix, and I would have never thought that Phoenix could be cooler this time of year than Portland, but I looked on the official weather source, weather.com. Portland is a predicted 112, Phoenix a predicted 112. So we'll have a little weather race today and see who wins. Very excited for today's program. We have a strong educational theme today and a reminder that humanists believe that the ultimate goal should be the fulfillment of the potential for growth in each human personality, not for the favored few, but for all of humankind. And that humanists urge the use of reason and compassion to produce the kind of world we want, a world in which peace, prosperity, freedom, and happiness are widely shared. This is one of my favorite times of the year with our readings as we honor our scholarship winners. To introduce and honor one of our scholarship winners today, I'll turn the program over to Scholarship Committee person Joyce Lackey. Joyce?
Hello. I am pleased to introduce Annalise Newberry, who tied for first place in our 2021 essay contest. Annalise just graduated from Prairie High School in Vancouver, where she says she tried almost every school activity, including theater, stage crew, volleyball, tennis, and was publicity manager for the Honors Society. An outdoors lover, she also hikes, paddle boards, and skateboards. I think her energy level would make a dervish envious. Admitted to several universities, Annalise will attend Western Washington University in the fall. Rather than immediately focusing on a particular major, she plans to dedicate her first year or two to exploring such topics as journalism, forensics, engineering, and economics. She already loves math, which could give her a boost in several fields. Her plans also include some study abroad. Here is a young woman who doesn't limit herself. As you will hear from her essay, she also has an interest in societal issues and human rights, and she does her research. Please give a warm Zoom welcome to Annalise Newberry. Get on the picture.
Oh. Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for having me here. I feel like very honored. And thank you for this opportunity. Obviously, college is a very expensive thing to be doing. So it's I feel very honored to receive this help from you guys. So I guess I'll just go ahead and read my essay. I know some of you have already read it, but here we go. So I called my essay The Mitigation of Misinformation and the Preservation of Human Rights. In 1989, Sir Tim Berners-Lee, a British computer scientist, invented what we know today as the World Wide Web. And with the birth of our most cherished gift from the digital revolution came an assortment of new dangers and responsibilities. Today, the internet and social media serve as a petri dish in which misinformation grows and spreads. This type of information is not only misleading, it is also severely damaging to democracy. Disinformation, a form of misinformation which is deliberately deceptive, is even more harmful. In the United States, this infodemic has created misinformed voters and fostered extreme party polarization in a country that is already more divided than ever. In the wake of the most turbulent year for our political and public health systems, social media companies are struggling to filter inaccurate and outright deceptive content from their platforms. This is a huge undertaking. This type of content is not only hard to identify, but users' rights can easily become caught in the crossfire when battling it. Companies sometimes struggle to mitigate misinformation without hindering free speech. To tackle the widespread misinformation on social media while preserving this freedom, companies should develop both preventative and reactive policies while continuously checking for possible human rights infringements. To fully understand the threat that misinformation poses to society, one must explore its past. Misinformation and its menacing alter ego, disinformation, have a long history of creating chaos and disrupting century-old institutions, as well as just tricking people into believing false rumors. In an article about the role of disinformation in elections, Max Bader from Leiden University addresses the problem as it has appeared in elections past. He discusses both domestic disinformation as well as disinformation spread on social media by foreign culprits. Bader identifies the 2016 Trump campaign and the Brexit campaign as two of the most disinformation-ridden campaigns in history. There's evidence that the Trump campaign involved manipulation of social media coverage and that the social media bots influence opinions on the Brexit campaign. The 2016 Trump campaign resulted in a presidency widely agreed to be one of the most damaging in American history, and disinformation is likely to blame for that election outcome. A smaller, less serious example of misinformation from the beginning of the coronavirus outbreak demonstrates the wildfire-like expansion of false information. In March of 2020, several videos of dolphins swimming in a Venetian canal were shared along with messages of hope for a struggling Italy. Dolphins hadn't been spotted in those canals for decades, supposedly because of boat pollution, which had cleared up due to the shutdowns. The story brought joy to thousands of people across the globe, except there were no dolphins in Venice. The videos were actually shot hundreds of miles away in a Mediterranean port. While this story would not be considered disinformation because it's unlikely that the source sought to intentionally deceive readers for its own gain, it still demonstrates how easily misinformation, including disinformation, can gain traction and become widely accepted as truth. Retrospectively, we wonder how these instances of misinformation could have been stopped before they became so widespread. The solution to this problem is complex, but it begins with social media companies implementing platform policies that protect their users from misleading information. It is impossible to identify all posts spreading falsehoods, but companies can implement techniques to help cut down on them. One technique, called fact-checking, is commonly seen on platforms like Facebook and TikTok. Fact-checking is reactive. It involves flagging posts that include keywords like Trump, coronavirus, or hoax, with a message alerting the viewer that the post is potentially misinformed. The flag is intended to make viewers think twice before believing the statement or sharing it with their friends. In some cases, a link is provided to a reliable source like the CDC. This is an effective way to slow the dissemination of false information without silencing users. A second, less well-known method of fighting misinformation actually involves prohibiting a practice rather than implementing one. The practice is known as microtargeting. According to the former chair of the US Federal Election Commission, Ellen Weintraub, microtargeting amplifies disinformation harms by targeting susceptible groups with political ads that the rest of society does not see. Microtargeting not only limits certain groups' exposure to opposing and varied ideas, but it shields entities who make untrue claims from the type of backlash they would receive from a wider, more diverse audience. Some social media companies have chosen to limit or entirely ban microtargeting, making a proactive effort to stop inaccuracies from spreading. Like fact-checking, banning microtargeting does not hinder users' free speech. The entity making the post is not silenced. In fact, they're given a wider audience, just one that's less easily manipulated. Misinformation is not eliminated directly using this method, but it can be eliminated indirectly by creating higher consequences for those who post false information. Regardless of the approach companies take to detecting and eliminating misinformation on their platforms, they are responsible for continuously checking their policies to ensure that they do not infringe upon users' rights. Standards such as those outlined in the United Nations Guiding Principles on Business and Human Rights are helpful to social media companies making big policy changes. In her article, In a World of Fake News, Evelyn Mary Oswald says that the UNGPs reflect international expectations for how companies should act when their operations intersect with human rights issues. A large portion of the guide is dedicated specifically to addressing how companies should handle misinformation without obstructing the right to free speech. Several of the most popular social media platforms, including Facebook, have modeled their policies after the UNGPs. While curbing the presence of misinformation on social media is vital to democracy and societal prosperity, preserving basic human rights is of paramount importance. With careful consideration and a strong dedication to protecting user rights, social media companies can develop effective and fair policies that achieve both goals. Thank you.
I'm interested. So there have been some attempts, like you said, to curb misinformation or disinformation, and like fact checking, etc. Do you know if there's been any measure of which ones are effective, which ones aren't effective? I kind of when I see something fact checked, I often see a kind of a knee-jerk reaction, almost like you know, it almost emphasizes it sometimes more than curbing it. So I'm just wondering if you had any feedback on that.
So I don't know the exact statistics, but I know that people have found that, well, a lot of companies or some companies will just take down a post, which is found to be not very effective because, that is infringing upon certain human rights, and that tends to just anger people and make them continue posting misinformation. But at the same time, with the fact checking, a lot of times, since it's done by like an automated system that detects certain words, it's almost like it appears too much, like it appears on posts that really don't need it, but it's still, it doesn't really hurt, but it's a little bit over the top. But when it comes to exactly what's more effective and what's not, I'm not exactly sure, but yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you, Annalise. And again, congratulations. It looks like we may have one more question from Joyce.
Oh, I'm unmuted. There may not be an answer to this one, but it follows a little bit from David's, I think. I have a nephew. When I told her something about fact check, she said, well, everyone knows that fact check is biased toward Hillary. So whether we've made any progress in establishing that some things actually are not biased, do you have any insight into that?
Well, I know that a lot of people tend to think that the fact checking is biased towards more liberal beliefs, just because a lot of the fact checking flags come up on things that where there's like a science side to it. So if someone posts about the coronavirus is a hoax, and then the fact check thing will probably come up, and it'll be to the CDC, and it'll be saying, the link will say that you should get your vaccine, you should wear a mask, etc. So people do tend to think that it is more biased toward more liberal beliefs, but whether or not that's true, I don't know.
Thank you.
Yeah.
I'll read a comment from Ingrid, which I think summarizes all of our thoughts. It says, Annalise, you are spectacular! 2 exclamation points. Good luck in college and beyond. Thanks for your wonderful essay. So well done. My understanding is you're attending Western Washington University, correct?
Yes.
I know you're going to do very well there, and the future is in good hands.
Thank you so much, everyone.
In keeping with our educational theme, it is a pleasure to have Jim Moch joining us today. Jim has a master's in secondary education and a bachelor's in history from DeUville College in Buffalo. He has 18 years of teaching experience in New York public schools. He is married and the proud father of twin girls. He speaks to us today as COVID-19 has forced incredible stress on students, teachers, and families, from students who fully and actively engage in the learning environment to students who need significant monitoring, to students who have vanished and have had no contact with the educational system for 1.5 years. Planning educational strategies is nearly impossible. Burnout is prevalent, and the long-term consequences are unknown. Jim is willing to take a few questions in the middle of the presentation, but most will be saved for the end. Please welcome, with an enthusiastic and yet muted Zoom welcome, for Jim Moch.
Thank you. Thank you. Well, I do appreciate the invite today. It's a lot of lip service is paid to what exactly is occurring with education today. And my experience is 18 years, but yesterday at a retirement gathering for one of my coworkers, he's been teaching for 52 years. And he said nothing compares to, what the last 1.5 years was like. And I have friends in the field too, and it doesn't matter where you're teaching, what demographic you work with, there's been significant challenges. And it's not just education. I always look at education as kind of the indicator species, the frog in the pond that's going to tell you that something is wrong before anything else will. And so when you take the cumulative effect of COVID, from parents losing jobs and stress on the taxation system and everything that spills into that, I'm going to look at it from the perspective of teaching, but really education itself is really reflective of just the society as a whole right now. So I always try to approach it with that kind of idea. So I have a brief presentation just to put some thoughts, and a lot of it is going to be obviously my own personal experience and what I work with and deal with in my particular school. And I'm going to kind of go through some of the history and how this all kind of enveloped, because it was pretty incredible how everything started to roll out. So as it was said before, let me jump in here. I've been teaching for 18 years. I'm sorry, I've been teaching for 17 years. I'm sorry, I've been married. I have twin girls that turned 14 on July 2nd. So that just reminds me, I gotta figure out what I'm getting them. But, so I see it as both a parent and as a teacher. I've seen the struggles that my own kids have gone through with this. They don't attend the district I teach in. They attend a district next door. And just the struggles that they're going through. So I teach predominantly sophomores and seniors, but I definitely have seen what's going on in the middle school. And it really is concerning to me, that 7th, 8th, 9th grade and those transitions that were missed, I think are going to have, that's the long-term consequence that I think we're going to spend a lot of time as educators trying to figure out how to catch these kids up and really attend to their social and emotional well-being, as well as any educational deficits that may have occurred. So as it was said, I attended DeUville College here in Buffalo. It's a small liberal arts college right on Lake Erie. I have my master's and bachelor's from there, and a minor in econ. So yeah, let's take a look here. Oh, on top of that, I also owned a construction company for about 12 years. I sold out of that due to injury. So I do have a pretty good perspective of not just the public sector, but the private sector too, when it comes to what's going on and how this has affected both business and the public sector. So let me tell you about my school district. This is actually a picture of the high school that I work in. And it is a smaller school. The district itself is relatively small. It has a relatively high cumulative wealth rating, meaning it's a upper middle class school district. It has about 2,200 students total from K through 12. It started out as a very, very rural school, and with the suburban sprawl, it has become more and more populated. It's a right-leaning community. So we've had some situations that have occurred politically because of the politically charged nature of not only the election, but just the whole wearing of masks, vaccinations, all that kind of stuff. And the older kids tend to give you more of a hard time with that. And we have a 97% graduation rate. We consistently rank in the top 5 in Western New York. It's just where, so the school is very successful. And we tend to have a very, safe and solid environment for our students. So I'll tell you how this all started for us. So we had heard the rumblings on the news like everybody else about this virus, and we were watching what was going on in Italy. And all of a sudden we have a staff meeting on a Friday, and that was on March 13th of 2020. And they said, hey, this is on the radar. We're not sure what's going to happen. Plan on, things going on as normal. But just keep it in the back of your mind that, we might be here, we might not, we might be here with restrictions, whatever. So we leave that meeting. And really the question that we all had was, why wasn't that just an email? And by Sunday night, we faced this robocall to the district and an email that we would be closed on Monday to allow staff to come in and get anything they might need, quote unquote, and that we would begin to start teaching fully remote from home to our students. And that was all the preparation that we had. And really kind of being caught fully unprepared. And you have a staff that is through all different gradients and across the spectrum as far as their ability to utilize technology. Now, I always liked to use the technology because I always found it easier to have things submitted electronically. It's less things to lose. It's easier to grade. But there were people that really had very, very little idea except for email on how any of this worked. Plus the students too. And it really did put a real significant amount of stress on not only students and staff, but parents as well. We found ourselves in a predicament, especially with some of the younger students, where if they can't figure out the program, their parents really weren't equipped to help them. And from March until June, everything was remote. And the normal class schedule, the normal meeting times was all thrown into the wind. You were competing with other teachers to try to figure out when you could squeeze your class in. And it was basically throwing, sand into the gears of a very well operating machine. So some key background. In this community that we live in, it does tend to be quite rural. So connectivity is one huge factor that came into it as well. We only have one high-speed internet provider in the entire township. So even, there's no, if you have a crappy connection, you're kind of sunk before you even start. And I know that it even occurred here in my own home where my 2 students were online. My wife's job went full remote, and then I jump on. And the bandwidth would crash. So I actually had to schedule my classes later in the day for 2 reasons. A, other teachers already took those time spots, and B, my wife's job, if she's on and my kids are with their teachers, the lag would make it impossible for me to teach. And then you get into the whole concept of the ability to log on from home. Some kids didn't have internet at home. Although I have a wealthier district, it's kind of weird because within a half a mile, you might have a very, very poor section of town, and in a half mile, you'll have some of the most expensive houses in the town. So you have kids that can't afford internet. And all of them deserve and have a right to the same education. So there was a lot of kinks that way to work out too. And the teacher's ability to utilize the technology as well. The other key thing too is our district doesn't get a lot of feedback from us on which direction we want to go technologically. So we bought into Microsoft software. So all the tools that we used are Microsoft based, OneNote, Microsoft Teams. So like right now we're using Zoom, and 90% of schools used Zoom. And so if you had friends in the industry, you would reach out and ask, what should I do? And they would tell you, you know, utilize Zoom and you utilize Google Classroom. And all these tools are really created to be more user friendly for the school environment. Teams is a great program. It's similar to Zoom, but it's Microsoft's package. But it's designed that for, you know, business applications, different projects that you would do, you know, in different time zones in different nations. It's too overdone for the simplicity that we needed. And again, it works great in the corporate setting, but when we get to a point where now we're relying on it, something like Zoom, which is much easier to use than Teams, and the Google Classroom that most districts use kind of was null and void for us. So you're starting with a limited knowledge base, and you're trying to figure out one of the most complex software programs at the same time. And that says nothing to doing the job yet, which made it quite challenging from that direction. So March through June, as we march on, the state, we have a program here called the Regents, and the state sets out these examinations. And eventually what the state exams were waived, and eventually the grading just became pass, fail, or incomplete. Did you do the work or didn't you? That right there puts kids behind the 8 ball, especially from a motivational perspective. You know, when you're preparing for one of these tests, it's a much more intensive educational experience. The knowledge base is bigger than just, you know, to put it bluntly, did I do enough to shut them up and give me a grade? So there was already a detriment to those kids coming into the year. And the incompletes, they had a half a year. Really, the work from last year wasn't an official fail until January. So if a kid went or just vanished or disappeared, there was a good chance when they came in September, not only do they have their workload, but they had a significant chunk from the year before. And that really put a lot of kids at a detriment. So all classes were at home. What we found out real quickly is there's educational law where we cannot require the kids to turn their cameras on. And so what you would find is you would have kids that would wake up, roll over, click Teams on their cell phone, put it on mute, and go back to sleep. You would find kids that would log on and go driving around. There was no way to monitor really the level of interaction or effort being put in. Kids were not allowed in the building at all. And one of the biggest detriments to that is all your extracurricular activities, all your sports, all the things that kids come to school for, that besides the education part, which for a lot of students is one of the biggest reasons that they go, is to have that opportunity to interact and to do the things they're passionate about. All of those were gone. Things like prom, graduation ceremonies, you know, were all wiped out. So I already said about the internet issues, the competition between parents and students for bandwidth. One of the big hurdles that we had to get over was the distribution of free and reduced lunch. That still had to be provided. Some districts did it where they would run their school bus run, and the bus aide would actually run the food to the door. Our school put it in the vestibule and people could come pick it up, and it was usually for multiple days. But that led to, real conversations about what we were scared of. And that was without having access to our students. A lot of times, cases of abuse, whether it be physical abuse, sexual abuse, things like that, when you don't have access to interact with the kids, it becomes very difficult to catch if there's an issue with a student. Some of our students, the best, and in many cases, in many schools, the best time that these kids have is being out of their house. And now they are locked in possibly or potentially a very dangerous environment. And the anxiety that created amongst the staff was very high. You can email a kid and they can tell you everything's great, but you really don't know that. You can't, read the inflection in their voice. You can't, if I ask a kid if everything is okay and all of a sudden they can't make eye contact with me, I know that there's something that they're hiding or that they don't want to talk about, but probably should. And all of a sudden we find ourselves in this situation where we have no idea how our students are really doing or if they're in danger. I ran into situations where parents weren't working from home, and the student that I had is the older sibling, and they were responsible for making sure all their brothers and sisters were in their classes and online. So I had a couple of students that when I reached out and just chatted with them, they came clean. I have a pretty much an open door policy when it comes to my students to, if something's up that prevents you from doing your work, let me know what it is and we can work with it. And I had several students that, by the time they get their brothers and sisters logged in or helped, with their art project, all of a sudden they're late or missed my class. And we worked around it and we figured it out. But that was an issue. Sometimes, especially with the littler kids or the younger kids, the stuff that's going on in the background when they're not muted creates issues, whether it's, I had one where there was literally a domestic going on in the background, like complete with a smack. And it that'll really change the room, that's for sure. Students disappearing. And by that, I mean, there are students right now that up until, so our school went back to having a full classroom of students about a month ago, maybe 5 weeks ago. And that was the first time they had any interaction with school since, the March when we all left. And they're completely behind. They're in a really, really dire situation. Or you would have a student that was going right along and then all of a sudden they disappear. And you find out that, a kid ran away or a kid was in, I had two students that I just stopped hearing from and eventually, went to student support services. The resource officer got involved and we find out that they are in rehab. Stuff that, I probably would have seen the downward cycle that would be occurring with a kid, or one of their other teachers might, or the counselors might. But now all of a sudden these parents are in a situation where they actually had to send the kids out of state during COVID for rehab. Quite sad, actually. So some terms that get thrown around and bandied about when we're talking about this is this idea of full remote versus in-person versus hybrid. And they'll talk about synchronous learning versus asynchronous learning. Now, don't worry, I'm not going to test you on any of these terms at the end. But a lot of times, everybody wants to package what's going on in a building in these. So full remote is just that, fully out of the building. In person, all the kids are there. And then when we came into school in September, you had to have 6 feet of distance all the way around a kid. And basically with the available square footage of the classroom, that worked out to be about half of the class could be in there at a time. So when September comes, we change from this all remote to having half the kids in the building that you're teaching to. Now, true hybrid is you would have half the kids in the building and you would be teaching them and focusing on them. And then at the second half of the week, they would switch, the kids would be at home and the other group would be in, okay? But it's like a hybrid car. When the electric part of your car is going, the gasoline engine isn't. When the gas is working, the electric isn't. And so they would keep referring to what we were doing at school as hybrid, but it really wasn't. What we had was a system where you would have cohorts A, B, and C. Cohort A would come to school Monday and Tuesday and alternate Wednesdays. Cohort B would come Thursday, Friday, and alternate Wednesdays as well. Then there was cohort C that never came to school. They were always remote. But our district would not allow us in any way to have that separation. So now you're basically trying to teach to 3 distinct groups the same thing. So you would have, let's say, 10 kids in front of you and you would have 14 kids at home. And you are projecting to the 14 kids at home while trying to monitor and catch the kids up in front of you. And as a teacher, basically what you're doing is taking one lesson and you have to really create 3 and teach them all at the same time. And it was an incredible amount of work, all while in the community you're hearing, well, you only have half the kids there anyways, you guys should only get half pay, but it was really a very, very challenging situation that there really were no good answers for. In fact, when I talked to my wife about her job or other teachers, you're really spending the day making the best of the bad decisions you could make. And so, just imagine having, 25 kids and you only actually see 20 of them at any point during the year. 5 of them you'll never meet. I had students this year that I've never seen in person in my life. But you go back and forth and split. So what we were looking for was the goal of really 2020. I know I'm backtracking, I'm a little bit out of order. Honestly, it was just to survive. It was to get the kids through, ensure seniors that graduate, and really utilize what went wrong in 2020 to try to make the 2020-2021 school year better. So I kind of already hit a lot of this, but the changes that occurred were the 6-foot rule and the division. Now, the other thing that was crazy about this was because of different testing and things, those 2 different cohorts could not come in on a day that wasn't theirs. So those 2 cohort groups never saw each other, at least in a school setting. So cohort B, it's almost like to them, cohort A doesn't exist because they didn't see them. And then, there was a whole group of kids that never came to school at all and did full remote. So they're kind of their own island too. And that was really the only way to squeeze them in. Parents, the way that some of these kids ended up fully remote was parents could opt their kids out of going to the building. So that's that fully at home cohort. And that got political at school board meetings. You would have a lot of back and forth, which created a lot of animosity between the kids too. And that was another thing with the face masks, constant reminder to wear your face mask. And then you would get kids that were, well, I'm vaccinated, I don't have to, or, you know, it would start to get you know, into a political argument in the middle of the hallway, which you tried to shut down. So some of the problems that we faced and that are going to continue to be is preparing these 3 distinct lessons for one topic, which leads to really just a time frame concern. You basically have tripled the workload without enough time to really be able to create it. We got into this situation now where, let's say, we'll take this example of 25 kids and 10 are supposed to be in your room. And then you come into your room, there's only 7. And then you would go in to do attendance and 3 kids are online that should be in school. And we started to get into this situation where kids were like, well, only half my friends are there, I'm not even going to bother to go. And they would basically, like I said, log in on their phone and just roll over and go to sleep. So, you know, as far as, you know, it was really difficult to set up any kind of strategic or meaningful criteria for attendance. And really, this really just the manner of teaching and testing and just understanding where the kids are, acquiring a picture or a snapshot of where these kids are, takes a lot of time to create, and we just didn't have it. So it's basically tripling the workload. And that's really what affected a lot of educators, was just they burned out. It was funny, you know, we, as a teaching community, we would joke around about, you know, by June or May, you know, the teachers are starting to get real frazzled and looking real tired and haggard, and that was happening by October. It was a significant issue. So the greatest issue was really just the time to create what we needed to create, and the time to evaluate. You know, it's not something, you know, the testing is different, and you know, maybe doing more project-based learning to do a couple of things: A, to engage the kid more, and B, so that you have to take a greater amount of time looking at the finished product, because that's the only measure you have of comprehension. I can't just talk to a kid or look around the room and see if they're really getting it. So all of that takes incredible amounts of time, all on top of learning these new software programs and things like that. Now, when the school year started, our district decided to do a 3-day training, which was good. So the first 3 school days were really just us learning and training. But what that did was it eliminated any training in the future during the school year. So if the district wanted a new software program or a new way of doing things, which they literally wanted us, it seemed weekly, to try something new, there was no time for training for that. There was no offer, you know, to do it after school or to pay to send people to training or anything like that. So you really were on your own. You know, you could ask my wife, I would spend, you know, 4 or 5 hours on YouTube trying to learn how to use a skill that the district expects us to use. And it was just crushing. So other districts were doing this thing where instead of that alternating Wednesday, they used Wednesdays, and they had a really neat setup. They said, okay, we're going to take Wednesdays and we're going to have our custodial staff deep clean the building, make sure that it's sterilized. And that was the other thing too. We were also, between every single class, we had to fully sterilize the classroom. So you have to get your stuff prepped, sterilize a classroom, and you have to do it in 4 minutes. And they would use that data to deep clean, and then they would hold an hour of office hours where students could log in, ask their teachers questions or clarify, and they would use the rest of the day then to train, to get caught up, to do things like that. And this seemed like a really good idea, and it was really effective. So we took this to our superintendent, and we were told, and I'm quoting, you people just don't want to work. That's what we were told by our superintendent. So you want to, add to burnout, that really set people off pretty quickly. And I believe Helen and I had a discussion about that the night that I was told that. I did not have nice things to say. But eventually, we did get half days on Wednesdays. That helped a lot. My office hours were open. I got some of that personal communication back, and things were going along okay. Things seemed to be working. And then we had November through January. So in New York State, I'm not sure how it was being done in Oregon, but New York State, they were testing every single town, and they had percentage of positive tests. So now that we finally got into the rhythm of what we were doing, all of a sudden we had to go fully remote again. They shut the schools down throughout the county. It was done on a town by town basis, and then county by county. Erie County, where I live in, which is the county that Buffalo's in, had this massive spike. And all of a sudden, now that we have gone from full remote to a system that is functioning, we go right back to remote again. And so for 3 months in the middle of the year, we have this complete change up. And meanwhile, we're still on track for these big high stakes tests and things like that. The only advantage to this one was we could actually go to the building. So I could physically go into my building, which was good. The bandwidth was faster and things at school. But again, it throws the kids, it throws the parents off completely, because, I tried to be sympathetic and put myself in the shoes of a few years ago. My daughters were in 8th grade last year. So, if that would have happened, they would have been fine. They could stay home alone. But now you have parents who knew the schedule. They have to all of a sudden have childcare for the whole week. It was really challenging and stressful for the parents. That, spills over to the kids and spills over to us. And again, it was just this constantly changing environment that there was absolutely no consistency. And students really need that some form of consistency to really be successful. So again, we went to that. And then eventually, when we came back from the new year, we were back to the old system. Then the CDC changed guidelines, New York State changed guidelines. And from the months of May and June, to give you an idea, our school year runs a little different. My last day of school was yesterday. May through June, now you could have everybody back in the room. You only needed 3 feet of separation. And it's really crazy because you go from September, where we needed 6 feet of separation, you needed face masks, and the kids carried a plexiglass shield room to room. So, you can imagine, even though the kids were together, they're all masked in their own little plastic cubes. It really wasn't very conducive to a solid learning environment. And then you go to May to June, where you still had kids that opted out and were still home. So you still had to live stream your classes to those kids at home, but your focus, at least, when I said that class of 25, you'd have 15 at home and 10 in the room. Well, now you have 20 in the room and 5 at home, and you could really at least attempt to target your instruction to the kids at home. And so you have, in just the space of one school year, 3 exceptionally different models going back and forth. The long-term consequences, and this is really where I want to focus, and then I'll, I hope to field some questions, because Like I said, I'm just giving you an overview, and hopefully there's some specifics maybe people would want or some clarification. The students' social and emotional learning and their ability is significantly been hampered. I'll give you an example. I had a student, I gave some instructions, and I get a message through Teams, but basically like a text message. And the kid was 10 feet from me. And I texted the student back and said, why don't you just ask me? And her response was that she's like, I don't want to be embarrassed by talking. And so you could have a room full of kids that literally did not speak to one another. They're 6 feet apart. They've got a mask on. They're sitting in this plastic cube. And so the ability for them to function and interact, not interact in the hall or at sports practice or whatever, but to interact and function in an academic setting has been significantly depleted. And I don't know how quickly that's going to come back. The things that happen to kids and the ability for them to work in a group setting, there's a lot of group setting and focus in college. In career, think of how much of modern corporate America is team-based, and they have lost that ability. So there's a lot of concerns that we have as educators on how they're going to function with that. The ability to work collaboratively, to bounce ideas off one another, is, it's almost non-existent. And the lack of cohesion in a school, like I said, these kids are separated into these two cohorts. And, the ability for the school, we saw it in these last 2 months, to be able to function as one school community with common goals, shared values, and a bunch of other buzzwords. But in this case, it really has put a hamper on that. In the younger grades, like I said, you take an 8th grader. All right. So like my daughters will be freshmen next year. They have not had an actual year of school with everybody together since they were in 6th grade. So all the social growth, all the emotional growth that occurs in middle school, and I have taught middle school, so I can attest to it, that's just wiped out. And looking at it from my perspective of teaching in a high school, what are the freshmen going to be like next year? Are we going to be dealing with social group issues and things like that? Emotional issues from, again, if a kid is growing up in a poor environment, an emotionally abusive environment, and that's gone unchecked for 2 years. What is the collateral damage going to be when they come up into these upper grade levels? What skills have they missed out on? I can tell you, I did my damnedest to keep my kids on a normal schedule, to get through all the material they need and to learn the skills that they need. But I can tell you that I know how I've performed for 18 years. There's no way that they got the same quality education that kids before them did. What is the long-term consequence of that going to be? If you're a senior and you've spent a year and a half doing what I've said, rolling over, joining the Teams meeting and going back to sleep, that's not going to fly in college. What is the consequence of that going to be? And, that's really what we look into, of where we really don't have any solid answers for this. We have some logical guesses, but what really happens in the end is going to be interesting to see. And hopefully interesting means that they are able to overcome it. But I think we're going to have significant challenges to overcome. The maturity level, things like that, I already talked about. And the unknown, we don't know what next year is going to look like. I mean, are kids going to be wearing masks or aren't they? Are they going to try to mandate vaccines? You know, regardless of what side anyone is on a vaccine debate, are you going to have two classifications? Are you going to have an unvaccinated room and a vaccinated room? You know, I can't imagine that's going to fly, but it's a fear that I have. You're going to create different classes of people on top of the classes that already exist in society, socioeconomic, racial, sexual orientation. You know, is it going to be just another thing? And I worry significantly about that. What is it going to look like next year? Not only are we going to have kids coming in with delays socially and in their maturation, but also academically. But now we can throw on, what's going to happen, this masked versus unmasked type of thing, vaccinated versus unvaccinated. That is really what, at this point, I'm sitting here, I'm going to spend my summer, unfortunately, worrying about, because I won't know what the plan is until September. And when, the government rolls out whatever they're going to roll out between now and then. All right, so that was a dry look at what we've been facing all year. I hope it wasn't too educationally lingoed. I know these are just the facts. This is just what I experienced. This is just what I saw. And hopefully, like I said, we're able to overcome it. And that's about it. I don't really know what else to say.
Jim, thank you so much for your dedication as a teacher and your presentation today. Congratulations on getting through the school year. You did it. You made it. That is cause for an extra celebration this year. And I hope you get a new superintendent soon, if you haven't already.
I wish.
Now, I'll start out with the first question, and then I know we have many questions coming behind it, and I may ask a more in-depth question right at the end, but for now, I have a clarifying question. It seems like of all the problems that you faced throughout the last year and a half, one of the biggest was the law that didn't require or allowed students to not show their face on camera. I don't have kids, so I'm a little out of touch on the educational system sometimes. Is that a New York law or a federal law?
That I don't know. I know it's definitely law in New York State. It has to do with student privacy. In the beginning, when we didn't know, like, it wasn't stressed that the kids didn't have to have their cameras on. I gotta be honest, like when I was sitting in my living room teaching, it created some incredibly uncomfortable situations. And part of the idea is that a kid, while they're on their camera, if they're attending class in a home that is not as big, as clean, whatever, it can create due to lack of a better term, a stigma for that kid. It also, the cameras being on can also create legal issues. And again, like I said, there were some uncomfortable moments, kids rolling over in bed and logging on. I'm basically like staring at a kid in his bedroom, and it was just incredibly awkward, and in some cases could have been illegal. So it creates, that's the idea, is basically, this is a way too long of an answer for a simple answer, but it's just about privacy laws and student privacy. Right. So I could say anyone who wants to, go ahead and turn your camera on. I tried that a couple of times, and 2 kids did. So the anonymity was something that was contagious with the kids. If they're anonymous, you're less likely to call on them, kind of a thing.
Right. I knew the questions would start rolling in, and they are. We have a question from Al Christians.
Okay, Jim, you teach social studies. That's like how society works. I'm thinking that in the face of a big thing like a pandemic, uh, society will succeed or fail as a group and not as an individual. But you didn't say anything about trying to recruit the kids or to challenge them in some way. That this is an unusual thing. This is something for you to help rise to also. That, you know, this is something you'll tell your great grandchildren about in 100 years. Let's all do our part and get through this. You know, get them involved in the effort somehow. That's the way democracy is supposed to work. That's our ideal of America. That, oh, everybody pitches in when there's trouble. Have you heard of anybody actually emphasizing that to the kids and trying to get them to help get get through this?
Yeah, I would say, I mean, that was literally every teacher every day. The administration, the teachers themselves, like, look, you know, this is something that hasn't happened since, you know, the Spanish flu. This is something that makes history relevant, you know, because this is how, you know, you would look at the examples of during the Spanish flu of cities that canceled parades and required certain things versus ones that didn't in their infection rates. But the idea of the unprecedented times, that we are better together, that we need to improvise and adapt and overcome and be more fluid in our day, was stressed constantly. The using it as an example for a government class on, you know, the use of executive power, the English class looking at literature that was written back during times of the plague or the flu or the Spanish flu in 1919, you know, that was reinforced constantly. The science department using it as part of their curriculum and adapting the curriculum to make it more relevant. Absolutely part of it. Talking about the governmental power and to what extent it can be used. But yeah, absolutely. I mean, I don't want to make it sound like we were all doom and gloom, because you know, the kids are already facing such adversity during this, but definitely was stressing the better together concept, that we're doing this to help one another. You know, you're wearing your mask maybe because, yeah, you look around and all the kids around you that to your knowledge are healthy, but what about, you know, your older staff members? You know, do you want something to happen, you know, to your favorite teacher? That kind of stuff was stressed all the time.
What was the reaction? Did it work? What percentage of the kids would you say reacted negatively to that? To you putting?
None reacted negatively to that.
That's
no.
Great. That's great.
It would get negative with the masks, and as it went on further, I would say it got a little worse. With the shenanigans around the election, it got a little worse with certain subgroups in the school. But there was never just a blatant disregard for one another. I mean, you do have a little bit of the, and it doesn't matter if it's a plague or not, you know, a 17-year-old is invincible. Just ask them, you know. But, you know, when you brought it down to the level of, you know, you're not just helping your classmates, it's helping your grandparents, you know, stuff like that. And I mean, there was never, I mean, some kids might not have believed it or thought it was total BS, but they never voiced it. So whether there was just blatant disregard for what we were saying in that arena, at least it wasn't vocalized openly or an open challenge that way in class.
Our next question is from Andy.
Thanks for the presentation, Jim. Couple of questions for you as a fellow teacher. And I actually teach in the same county that Annalise is a student in, although unfortunately I'm not at her school. Would love to have her as a student. I'm a secondary math teacher. And I wondered whether you shared my impression. So I just finished my second year of public school, school teaching. Before that, I actually taught at the college level. So what's been interesting for me, you referred earlier to like a degree of leniency, I think the term was the term you used, and whether students are being adequately prepared for the college level. But the greatest challenge I think we faced in my school district, and we were remote, purely remote, a lot longer than you were. We started going hybrid again only this past March.
Wow.
But what I learned was how valuable the classroom environment is for learning. Making sure students are on task, giving students easy access to the teachers who are asking questions. Even when we were remote, students could set up appointments for sort of online tutoring, but I found they're a lot less likely to do that than they are, just to raise their hand in the classroom and, can you come over here and help me with this math question? So, was that your impression too, that the main reason learning suffered was just the absence of the classroom environment, which is the most conducive environment to learning? And then second question, as somebody who's relatively new to school teaching, how has teaching changed over your 18 years? So like I discovered a couple of things that are just sort of standard accepted practice now, at least in my district, that were unthinkable when I was a student. So for example, I'm not allowed to penalize late homework. So I've got to give students full credit as long as they submit their homework by the end of the semester. But math, being an incredibly cumulative subject, does not lend itself, to doing well if you put off all your work until the end of the semester. Or cheating, right? I can't give students a 0 for cheating on the test. I just have to create another test for them to do, because academic honesty is considered in our district not a mathematical standard. Timely submission is not a mathematical standard. So we're not allowed to grade on those standards. So I'm sort of curious, like over the long term, how you've seen teaching change in your 18 years.
Well, I'll address the first part of your question. Yeah, I would agree with you 100%. The classroom is the most conducive environment for learning. My own particular teaching style is based on my ability to interact with my students. The ability to joke around, just talk, communicate, and honestly have an enjoyable time and goof around a little bit. That's my shtick. And that's how I get buy-in from my students. And losing that ability, it was worse than being a student teacher. I did not perform anywhere near as well as I felt I should have been. I will also say that as far as like me personally, when I got my students back in my room, I was teaching better instantly. My mental health was better. I felt invigorated to do my job, not just survive it. Yeah, the workload was still the same. Yeah, I still had kids remote, but having my classroom full of kids and being able to interact again really, really amplified the enjoyment of my job. As far as teaching goes over 18 years, obviously technology is key now more so than it was, but with some of the things that you're talking about. So if I was in my second year teaching and they dropped something like that on me, like homework can't be late, make a new test, all that, I would have lost. I mean, I would have been furious, and I would have absolutely been disgusted. But after 18 years, I look at it from this standpoint. If a kid, especially in a cumulative subject like math, doesn't do their homework and and they cheat on tests, basically it is going to catch up to them. They're not going to be an honor roll student or really get the rewards for doing the work. Yeah, it sucks, and it's going to bother you maybe on a level of ethics, but in the end the result is going to be the same. So I think the big difference now is after 18 years, things that are out of my control like that don't bother me as much, because on the bigger picture, I know that the result is still going to be the same. I guess where the only reason that would bother me, what you're describing, is because there's no consequence, then the student sees no need to change what they're doing. So that would be the part that would bug me the most. But I always look at it from the perspective of, the kid in the middle. It's you got your honor student kids that's self-motivated and incredibly bright. They're easy to teach. There's the kids that are, might be special ed or have IEPs or whatever, and they get the extra resources thrown at them. But the kid in the middle is the one where a policy like what you're describing really hurts, because they might have a C+ average, but they actually worked for that C+ average and really busted their butt for that B-, where the other kid is only a point or two behind them. That's what would have bugged me about it. But I know in the beginning of my teaching career, what you're describing would have really made me angry. But I think at this point, I just see that it's pretty much going to work itself out just with the final performance, or if there is an end of the year state assessment, they're done. So from that perspective, I would see the bigger picture that it'll work itself out.
We have a couple more questions that I know we can get to, but I'm going to take a little bit of an MC liberty here, and you're welcome to decline this invitation. But Annalise, I see your smiling face in the middle of my screen. I'm really curious to hear your perspective about what the pandemic was like for you.
Yeah, so I was online for the end of last year, completely online. And then we transitioned this year to, we were online for a while, and maybe Andy can chime in if I say anything wrong, because my timeline's a little bit messy, but we eventually transitioned to some days online, some days in person, and then we eventually got back to fully in person, which was really nice. But when it comes to actually being in the classroom, I absolutely agree that is so vital, because I'm one of those students who will stay after, ask a bunch of questions, and you can do that in Zoom, but there's a level of awkwardness to it when you have to like unmute, you have to, I don't know, it's just easier when you're in person, and you can actually go up to your teacher, have a face-to-face conversation. They can correct you. It's just more, it's just easier. And also being in a classroom full of other students, they ask questions that maybe you were thinking of. Yep. So you don't have to be the one to ask every single question. And you also get that additional information that maybe, oh, I wasn't even thinking about it that way. I'm glad they asked that question. So yeah, I know a lot of people in my school struggled when we were online, and I'm just glad we got to go back for a little bit.
Yeah, I was happy that happened as well. Our next question is from Helen Christians.
Jim is my Jim is my nephew, and I went to school at the same school he's teaching at. So I really felt connected to this presentation. Jim, thanks so much for doing this. But I do have a question for you.
Sure.
If you could jump ahead 10 years, I mean, we've all, certainly this group, being able to Zoom was saved the organization. And because we couldn't have met in person. And I kind of feel like if you survived COVID and your organization is still alive, you're going to do okay. And so you guys, these teachers, have kept school going. If you could jump ahead 5-10 years, how do you think this experience that you've had is going to affect your teaching once this is all over, once COVID is done and you're back to being a teacher without all these restrictions?
I would say, if we look at the numbers of it, I'm halfway through my career, maybe just a little bit past halfway. And it's one of those situations where it's definitely, when I got my students back, I say my students, when the students came back, it reinvigorated me to a level that I didn't realize how bad I felt about not having my students. And when we had that remote, when the students went remote and you went to an empty school every day and sat in an empty room, it messed with you. Schools aren't meant to be empty. They're spooky when they are. I think it has given me an appreciation as to why I decided to do this job over other jobs to begin with. And I think I needed it at this point in my career. I never lost sight of why I taught. I never lost my enjoyment of it, but I really think it ignited more of that first beginning of my career passion that I had for it. 5 to 10 years from now, I mean, on a policy level, I don't know. I think you're going to see options now where, like, a central clearinghouse, like in New York, we have BOCES, regional centers. I think you'll see kids that will opt out of going to school and they will go to, like, BOCES would set up a all remote school. So I think you'll see stuff like that in the future. And I think you're going to see that next year with parents or kids that have immunocompromised family members and can't take the chance or whatever. But I think you will reach a point where, out of all the districts in Western New York, and let's say, I think there's 70 of them, but, if you have 15 kids per school that just don't do well in school for whatever reason, or they have a social anxiety disorder or something like that, I think you're going to see a regional clearinghouse, if you would, of kids that are going fully remote.
Fittingly, our last two questions come from our immediate past president of HTP and our current president. Wayne, we'll start with your question. There you go.
My question is, how many of the teachers just couldn't accept and couldn't learn the new concept? Did a lot of teachers have to drop out from teaching, or was there enough support for all the teachers to transition?
That's a tough one, because school districts are usually, at least around here, there's kind of waves. And so we didn't have a lot of people that were, of retirement age. However, there were many teachers at the end of last year where we ended the year fully remote that checked out. They were done, and so the ones that could retire did, with a few exceptions. A lot of the staff members that were older, they had kept up enough with the technology to be able to at least be able to get on, to the meeting. They were taught how to get onto the meeting and conduct their class. There might not have been a lot of extra, and that's not just an age thing either. That was also, there were some people that were older that are tech wizards, and they were fine too. So there might not have been a lot of, like, should we say, enhancement or enrichment, but they were able to get through. And that last year was really just a pass fail situation for the students too. So you weren't worried about a big state assessment at the end that your name is on. But I think for the most part, they were able to pick up enough from their peers. And I want to stress that it sure as hell didn't come from training opportunities from the district, in order to be able, using their own initiative and their peers, they were able to get through.
Our last question comes from David Danucci.
I was wondering, so we've seen all the obstacles for some of the students, et cetera, and for, in fact, most of the students, and we are getting the idea that, at least on average, this was not a very good year for most students. But do you think there were some students who got all that they ordinarily would have gotten out of a year of schooling? And in fact, do you think maybe some students might have seen this as an improvement in some ways over their normal environment?
Well, to start off with, there are times that I have students that are so smart that honestly I could say, hey, by June, I want you to know about the world from, the French Revolution to World War II, and they would come back in June and know everything. They're intrinsically motivated, they're incredibly bright. There's always that group where, yeah, they make me look great, but I didn't have a damn thing to do with it. Are there some kids that maybe thought it was optimal? Yeah, if you have a kid that, has issues socially and school is misery, only having to be there half the time was a respite for them. So yeah, I think so. Do I think that there are kids that got the same level they normally would have? I don't want to speak for every teacher, but no, I don't think so. I think there's diversions in classes that occur that maybe don't even deal with the curriculum, but it's just something the class kind of moved its way into that only happens because that particular group of kids is there together at that time. And so I would say, and I will speak for myself, there is not a chance that those kids got what they normally would have gotten from me in any other year. Just time alone. That impossible.
We're going to let the last word come from our scholarship winner. Annalise had a comment.
Sorry, I just, I had something quickly to say in response to that question. I know that I agree with Dave or Jim that definitely there's no way that many people got more when it comes to the education part. But interestingly enough, a lot of my friends commented that their mental health and certain elements of their health did improve when we were remote because of I guess just the workload maybe diminished at times, and you were able to sleep in, which people might think that that's lazy, but a lot of people aren't getting 8 hours of sleep when you do have that full school schedule, 6 or 8 classes a day. So I know a lot of people commented that their their health and their mental health did improve, but I do agree that the education is never the same unless you're in person.
Thank you so much, Jim, for being with us today and for all the work you're doing there in upstate New York.